Incentive or Devil's Diamonds should be played with one standard card deck and 6 dices. 3 dices is the minimum for the game. The game can be played by 2 to 4 players, but the score value amounts to 500 by each player. 2 players means that the earner needs to score 1,000, 3 amounts to 1,500, and 4 to 2,000. The game is divided into the role of an earner and one or multiple runners. The earner deals 4 cards to each player counterclockwise, including themselves, and puts 4 face down in front of themselves. The game should be played for 6 rounds, and the cards that remain in play will be shuffled after each round is over. The rounds progress until the earner is bust. The runner's objective is to determine what score value the earner has in their hand, so that they could assess whether to meld their own hand or fold. These are the card values. The ace amounts to 500, the king amounts to 400, the queen amounts to 300, the jack amounts to 200, the 10 amounts to 100, 9 to 90, and so forth. In a 1v1 game, these are the rules, which are also applicable to 1v2 and a 1v3 game, but with a higher score system and a different swap ratio, which will be explained later. The earner can win a round by having cards that amount to over 1,000 in their hand, or have the runner meld theirs to achieve a total score of over 1,000 by combination of both hands' values. As long as the runner doesn't meld their cards and folds, the earner earns the round's hand and progresses even if its value is lesser than 1,000. When the runner melds and the earner doesn't achieve a score higher than 1,000 with both hands' values combined, they are bust. Therefore, the earner profits from their hand for the 6 rounds if their score is over 1,000 or if the runner folds, and the runner tries to determine whether or not their own hand would amount to a score about 1,000 with the earner's hand in each round. If it does, they should fold in order to avoid contributing an additional round score for the earner. But if the runner melds and their mutual score doesn't exceed 1,000, then the earner is bust and doesn't earn their score for that round, or progress to another, and the rules of the game change. After the cards have been dealt by the earner, from the first runner to the earner last, counterclockwise, players may then discard a limited amount of cards to replace them in their hand, first starting from the earner. The discarded cards remain out for the rest of the game and are not shuffled with the rest of the deck. This is the swap ratio according to the number of players, or runners. In a 1v1 game, so one earner and versus one runner, both the earner and runner can discard and swap a maximum of 2 cards in their hand. In a 1v2 game, which would be one earner and 2 runners, the earner can discard and swap 2, and the 2 runners can only discard and swap 1 card from their hand. In a 1v3 game, so one earner versus 3 runners, the earner can discard and swap 3, and the 3 runners can only discard and swap 1 card. The earner should aspire to discard low-value cards to attain a higher value hand, whereas the runner should aspire to do the opposite. The discarded cards are out of the game and cannot be reclaimed, and the cards for a player's hand can be swapped for each round according to the ratio, and only at the beginning of the round. If a player has 1 diamond in their hand will carry an additional bonus of plus 100 with their score if the earner passes the round successfully. If their hand doesn't consist of diamonds, it will contribute no bonus for the overall score. Therefore, if every player has 2 diamonds in their hand, each hand will carry a bonus of plus 200 if the earner has exceeded the mark for winning the round. This bonus, of course, is in the earner's benefit, and the bonus increases when a player has more than 1 diamond in their hand. If the earner is bust with the overall score, however, and doesn't win the round, the bonus then isn't added and cannot help them reach the passing score. The runner rolls 6 dice to pursue their task of assessing the earner's hand, which can be thrown only 3 times to attain a threefold of the same number to get the earner to divulge some of their hand. Numbers of pursuit can be left aside to easier roll and attain a threefold, like in Yam. These are the dice number values. A threefold of 1s would mean that the earner has to swap 1 card in their hand with one of the front and reveal which card they have thrown out. A threefold of twos would mean that the earner has to swap two of their cards with the front and reveal which cards they've thrown out. A threefold of threes would mean that the earner has to swap three of their cards with the front and reveal which cards they've thrown out. A threefold of fours would mean that the earner has to swap all four of their cards with the front and reveal the hand they've thrown out. Then, a threefold of fives would mean that the earner has to put down and reveal the lowest value card in their hand to the runner without swapping anything. And a threefold of sixes, similarly, would mean that the earner has to put down and reveal the highest value card in their hand to the runner without swapping anything. If it so happens that the runner doesn't get a threefold in all three rounds, the option that always remains throughout the game is to request the earner to do a blind swap, which would simply be the earner changing their whole hand by taking the face down cards in front of them and putting their hand face down without divulging what cards they have lost and attained in their newly attained hand. The earner can refuse the request, however, and it can be made whenever in the round by the runner, including the beginning. The blind swap always amounts accordingly to the face down cards available. The earner can only be requested for a blind swap if there are cards in front of them that are face down. If the runner had previously rolled a threefold of fours, they can no longer request the earner to swap their hand, as the changed cards have already all been divulged. Also, if the earner had, for instance, swapped one card to respond to a threefold of ones, and the runner then rolls a threefold of fours, the earner now only has three face down cards available and can only swap those three instead of four. This intermittence of swaps by lesser roll values gives the earner more leeway to choose which cards to save in their hand and which to have replaced, as they can pick which cards to divulge and which to keep in their hand with a threefold that is lesser than four. Thus, they could even bluff with their throwaways if they decided it was an appropriate way to fool the runner. The runner also doesn't have to roll for all three rounds. They may decide to meld or fold at any time if they have deduced that they should, and may always request a blind swap without rolling, unless there are no face-down cards available to swap, as previously explained. The only cards that leave the game are the ones each player replaces at the beginning of each round. Once a round is finished, the cards in play are shuffled with the whole deck and dealt again, and cards can again be discarded and replaced from the deck at the beginning of the next round. The cards replaced at the beginning are the only ones that go in the discard pile and do not enter the game again. As the rounds progress, less cards will remain in play. So, when the earner is requested for a blind swap or has to change cards in their hand, the cards in their hand are simply laid out in front or put face down and not discarded from the game. They remain in the game. The earner may pick which cards to throw out and reveal to the runner if the requested number is a roll of lesser than 4. So, for example, if the earner has to throw out and reveal 3 of their cards because of a threefold of 3s, their safest option is to choose to keep the highest card in their hand while throwing the lower cards out. Bluffing by purposefully throwing out the higher card in their hand to give the runner a wrong impression of their hand is an option which the earner has and could choose to do in some instances. For example, if the earner has a pair of 3s and a pair of jacks in their hand, and the runner rolls a threefold of 2s, the earner could throw the pair of jacks out instead of the 3s in the effort to convince the earner that they kept the higher value cards in their hand, thus potentially fooling them. The bluffing doesn't apply if the runner has rolled a threefold of 5s or 6s, as the earner then must divulge the lowest or highest value card by placing it face up on the table. Otherwise, they are cheating. If the runner rolls a threefold of 6s simultaneously or 2 times in their 3 rolling rounds, so 6 6s, the earner then must divulge their hand's highest and second highest card. And then with a 6 and a 5, both their highest and lowest value cards, and with 6 5s, their lowest and second lowest cards. When taking turns to replace a card at the beginning of the round, the earner always goes first, as turns now progress clockwise instead of counterclockwise, which was how the hands were first dealt. A player must first discard a card from their hand before receiving a replacement. They cannot keep the card they wish to replace in their hand while drawing a card, especially to then discard the drawn card. The players don't have to replace cards in their hand, but once they have discarded a card for replacement, they cannot retrieve the discarded card. These are rules and instructions for a team of runners. The runners can't openly inform each other of their hand's value, they can only express their opinion on whether they have a good hand for melding or not. They can openly speak of which high cards they have discarded and are out of the game, though they could also use code names for each high card so that the earner doesn't catch on to know when they can bluff and with which cards. The runners can estimate the value of the earner's hand, and they can evenly divide the dices to roll them at the same time if they wish. They must concord to meld, otherwise one runner cannot meld alone. The team of runners should keep track of how many and which high cards are out of the game.